Hey, everybody. Wow, okay, so this is probably going to be, well, fingers crossed and knock on wood because I'm about to jinx it, but this is going to be an awesome BlinkOn. As you can see, the space is fantastic. Before I start anything, I just want to do a shout out to Nick, who may not be in the room. He may be helping make it continue to be awesome, but Nick sort of really has just leveled up BlinkOn again and again, so I want to say thank you and a round of applause. All right, so a few announcements. I'm sort of the boring talk, and then we'll jump into the keynote. So just kind of running through all of them. Please remember that we have a code of conduct for BlinkOn. There'll be more discussion about it later, but just generally keep in mind, if you want to find it, it's linked to from the BlinkOn 9 info page. Also, talks here have to be sort of locked in ahead of time. As you can see, this is a very fancy stage. So if you're giving a talk in the main room today or tomorrow, well, today you should hopefully already have done this, but tomorrow, please make sure all your slides are locked in by noon. So a bit of a deadline there, but if folks could get that done, that'd be great. Otherwise, we have this whole space, which is amazing. It's the first time we've been able to have such an open venue for everyone, including sort of non-Google attendees. So you shouldn't need a badge to get in anywhere here, which I'm very excited about because I don't have to run around badging people in. But the badge, which I'm not wearing now, but the badge you were given upon entering is how you get into the building for both days. So please don't lose that. That's what you need to show to get in, and that's what allows us to have everything else open. So please don't lose that. Otherwise, for talks, we have the ability to record talks, but we're not going to be recording any by default, I think, except maybe the main room. I will double check that part because I actually don't know. But if you want your talk to be recorded in any of the side rooms, we'll have instructions on the GVC units for you to set it up. So just remember, if you want it recorded, you have to sort of initiate that. And for any Googlers who are in a presentation that's being led by a non-Googler, if they're having trouble with the GVC, please just help them out so they can sort of get that started quickly. Otherwise, so we have a whole bunch of talks, we have a bunch of open space, and this time we also have a bunch of dedicated brainstorm rooms that are free at all times. So if you want to have a brainstorm with sort of smaller group, informal, anything like that, feel free to check the schedule, which we'll have posted on all of the screens like this, what the current talks and what rooms they're in. We'll also list what rooms are free. So feel free to grab a room if you'd like. We do ask, though, just so that things stay open and everybody who wants to be involved in a conversation can, if you could just swing by the gathering room upstairs before you start a discussion and just give people a heads up that you're going to be having a discussion so that people who want to attend can. Similarly, if you want to just sort of be open to different brainstorms, the gathering room or in front of the gathering room is a good place to hang out because, as I just asked everyone, that'll be where people are sort of going to announce talks that are happening. Otherwise, I think everything should be pretty smooth. I saw a hand go up.
Is there a live stream? I know we had people back in Waterloo that were interested in seeing the main room.
So we don't have a live stream in the traditional sense of like a live stream, but I think we're going to try and have this room set up to GVC, and of course anyone can GVC into any of the side units. Again, don't hold me to that because I'm sort of speaking off the cuff here. I will double check and see if we can get this room GVC'd, and if we can't, it's my fault, no one else's. But yeah, we'll try to have GVC set up for folks, at least in this room. I think you totally killed my train of thought. You just maybe lose everything. Oh, right, I was going to say, everything is like super amazing here, and I think that provides the illusion that everything is going to run super smoothly, and hopefully it will. But just keep in mind, this is the first time we've upgraded to a space like this before. We have an event staff helping us with everything. So there may be some rough edges. Please just keep that in mind. You know, be patient if it takes a second to get something set up. A lot of people who are old hats at doing BlinkOn presentations, it's going to be new for them, and so they may try something one way and it not work for a presentation. So just keep that in mind. But otherwise, I'm hoping everything will go super smoothly. Last but not least, we have lunch, which will be on this floor and the floor above, and similar for breakfast, right? There's downstairs and upstairs, so if you're having trouble finding food or a table, feel free to go upstairs or downstairs if the upstairs is full. But otherwise, yeah, I think that's everything. If I've forgotten, I have a logistics session later that I can cover. Otherwise, that was quick. We've got maybe like 5-10 minutes until the keynote starts. If you want to stay here, that would certainly be the easiest for everyone else. Feel free just to chat. But if you want to hop out, use the bathroom. It's marked WC for anyone who doesn't know that Water closet is a common way of referring to bathrooms outside of the States. But otherwise, welcome to BlinkOn 9. We're going to start now.
Hey, good morning. I'm Alex Russell. I am a software engineer on the Chrome team, and you probably know me mostly from nagging you on your intent to ship threads about filing for tag review and why you should have done that several months ago. And it's a big honor today to be teeing things up for Ojan and Rick.
I'm Rick Byers. I manage the Blink team at Google Waterloo.
I'm Ojan. I wrote Blink code once, and now I do things.
So Ben Goodger, who you heard from at the last BlinkOn in Tokyo, if you were lucky enough to be there, and Ben Galbraith, who I know from the Ajaxian days, that's how long he's been a web partisan, asked us to get up and talk about what we're doing, but also to bring context to the next 2 days. Perhaps the single most important part of that context, though, is our identity as a community. The way we treat each other is as important as anything else that we do here in Blink. And that means that everything that we do over the next 2 days is, of course, governed by the Chromium Code of Conduct. The organizers will be around, and if any of them are here, can I get them to stand up? I know Drew is here. Anyone with a staff shirt, or Ojan, Rick, and myself, if you're having a bad time, please let us know. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that in person, the email address community@chromium.org is where you can let all of the organizers know that something didn't go right. We are committed to having an inclusive event. And it's important to understand that Blink is a community more than a code base. We respect and appreciate your decision to spend the next 2 days with us, and so we want you to respect and appreciate everyone else's decision to do that too. And while I'm calling out the organizers, can we get another round of applause for them? Drew mentioned how awesome this space is, and it is. And it is almost impossible, you probably don't have this context, but it's almost impossible to get a space this large at a Google campus anywhere in the world for this long. It just doesn't happen. And they were able to make this happen. And they pulled it off year over year with a grace and aplomb that makes it look easy. So thank you again for making that happen. And boy, is our community growing. Once again, this is our biggest BlinkOn. The very first BlinkOn attracted more than 50 registrations. Last fall in Tokyo, we capped out the venue at 265 or 266. And this week, more than 300 of you are here. Almost 315 of you are joining us, traveling from more than a dozen countries, representing 27 different companies. Usually, we have sort of a NASCAR of various company names here, but it doesn't fit. In a year when getting travel visas to the US is as hard or harder than it's ever been before, a lot of you took the long way around and did that. I'd like to especially call out our friends from UC who came here all the way from China. We know that's not easy. We're grateful for you to doing it. So, yeah, more than 300. But while we're talking about who's here, I think it's also important to recognize who isn't. Looking around, I'm hugely grateful to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come spend 2 days with your colleagues. But we're a strong enough community to recognize that not everyone we want to be here is. So open source and open standards are sort of some of the most difficult places for building inclusion and diversity. And our work sits at the center of those two potentially difficult forces. Our asynchronous communication methods, our need to use mailing lists and other sort of unpersonal forums make it difficult to understand everyone's communication tone and treat each other in all times and at all places like the humans that we want to appreciate each other as. So if we're going to be building the future of computing for everyone, client-side computing that is, then we need all of the perspectives that those diverse voices bring to help us build the best product we can for all of those users. As you take part in the next 2 days, try to keep in mind who's missing and what we can do in the future to ensure that everyone that we want to be here in the future can make it next year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. So I'm going to talk about, the rest of the talk is going to be structured like normal. I won the fight with these guys to get to brag about all the awesome accomplishments you all have made over the last 6 months. So I love that part. And then Alex is going to talk kind of big picture about our mission, hopefully set some framing for some of the discussions for the next couple days. And then Ojan's going to talk about a few of the specific projects that we're excited about for the next 6 months. So first off, let's talk about things that results we've achieved since the last BlinkOn. First of all, our community revolves fundamentally around our shared code base. And all of you who contribute to it have a stake in how it evolves. And this includes, this is super powerful, the collaboration between all the different teams. Oftentimes, a great user experience comes from a combination of things that have happened in V8 and layout and paint and input. And but it's hard. We'd like to try to track how is our code base as a whole doing, and that's really hard to do. We tried to come up with some good metrics. I've got a few pulses that maybe are worth looking at. Our intent process is designed to give us transparency and a good governance structure for how we ship and remove APIs. So we think this is one useful measure of our progress in terms of the API surface area that Chromium offers. We still have a high rate of progress, but you can see we've had a bit of a dip in the features that we've shipped in the latter half of 2017. We should talk about whether or not that's something to worry about or not. Also, I want to call out, we're increasingly taking advantage of origin trials. That's the purple line there. There are many scenarios where we find that can help us iterate faster to get to the best design based on real feedback from real developers in the wild. Also, at BlinkOn, we always take a look at our bugs. This BlinkOn, I thought we'd do this a little bit differently. In the past, we've shown overall Blink bug data. This time I thought we should take a look at, historically, the trend of what we as a community have identified as our most important bugs, right? Pri0, Pri1 bugs are supposed to be ones that we say, these really need to be fixed for a given milestone. And so when we look at the ratio of Pri0 and Pri1s opened versus closed, we see a pretty alarming trend over the last couple of years. That ratio is growing, just about to hit 4, which means for every important bug we're fixing, we're opening 4 new ones. That doesn't look like a good sign to me. We should talk about what we think that means and what we want to do about it. But I think we get a bit of a hint. If we take a look at the Chromium Dash graph here at the bottom right, we have these service level objectives that we try to achieve. And one of them is about, we know that it's critical that we're addressing the top priority issues, right? We can't let major regressions, if we let major regressions seep out into our stable channels, right, that really harms developers' experience of the web. So, and we can't possibly hope to be addressing the worst issues if we're not even looking at the incoming. So one of the key metrics we track is our triage rate. We aim to have all new bugs that come into Blink, have someone look at it and an expert in the area make a judgment call on whether or not this is a Pri1 or not. Should we consider this urgent and potentially release blocking? Wow, and someone's calling me. Suspected spam caller, awesome. So you can see this is just the last 3 months, but there's a bit of a worrying trend in that our untriaged rate is climbing pretty steadily as well. So maybe this graph isn't quite as bleak as it looks. Maybe we're just not doing a great job deciding which are the P1 bugs and which aren't. Anyway, something to talk about over the next couple of days. We're going to keep an eye on this data, though, and try to figure out, as a community, what it means for how we should be prioritizing. Also, code health is absolutely critical to our project's velocity. We hear from all of you that one of the most challenging things about working on this project is the code base is pretty darn complicated. Part of that's the nature of what we do, but some of it is addressable. And so investing in areas that make us all more productive is an extremely important part of everything we do. So I just want to give a quick shout out here to some of the big code health projects that have landed over the last 6-7 months or so. In particular, I'm excited. Root layer scrolling has been going on for a couple of years now, and this was an effort to unify the 2 distinct scrolling paths in Blink. We used to have scrolling that was for the document and scrolling for overflowed scroll divs. I think this really dates back to the introduction of actually being able to scroll divs. So now there's just one scrolling code base in Blink, letting us remove a whole lot of code and simplify how we evolve scrolling, and hopefully get us to the point where we can even merge Blink scrolling with compositor scrolling so that Chrome only has one way to scroll. Also, Slimming Paint's major project that's really important. That is the next big version of that, version 1.75, had some is landing now. This is improved architecture for how we do rastering and make compositing decisions, and it unlocks some really important performance benefits, like being able to scroll off the main thread even if we need to do rastering on Windows, and also fixes some bugs that developers have been complaining a lot about that were real structural bugs that we didn't have a way to fix in the old architecture. Also migrating our built-in elements to Shadow DOM v1 helps pave the path for being able to deprecate our Shadow DOM v0 and Web Components v0 that no other browsers support. And just continuing to we're continuing to put efforts into having Blink fit in more with the broader Chromium code base. Because after all, we're really just one Chromium project with one set of goals. There isn't a clear line between what's Blink and what's not Blink, right? So thank you, everyone who's helped make the others around you more productive. Keep it up. All right. Of course, performance is a huge part of what we do. We know that when a computing experience gets faster, people use it more, right? Users will choose the experiences that are fastest. So since last BlinkOn, I'm excited. We've gotten a fair bit more scientific about how we approach this. We've agreed on, in Google at least, we've agreed on 5 metrics that are the high-level, like user-facing, how the user perceives the web experience that we're focusing on at the moment. In particular, we know page load is important. We know that the longer page load takes, the more likely users are to just abandon loading a page. So first and foremost, our top metric is first contentful paint. That's just a way of trying to measure when does a page look like it's visually loading. And so, right, so that's a key metric for measuring page load. Also, increasingly, we're having more and more devices that have low memory, and out of memory is becoming an increasing problem for Chrome users. So we're starting to track our OOM rate, specifically on Android low memory devices, as a key metric. Because that's ultimately, the user doesn't really care how many bytes we're using, right? But what they care about is how often is my tab just going away and getting a sad dinosaur because I ran out of memory. So these are trying to track the things that actually matter to the users. Expected queuing time is our metric of how responsive the page is. So how long should a user have to wait when they interact with the page? Do they expect to wait? And then we've got some scroll metrics that are about how smooth the user experience is in response to input. So this list is not static. We know it's got some big holes in it. For example, we know the web has been evolving. There's a lot of websites that visually load quickly and then do a whole ton of JavaScript work and are just impossible to use for seconds after the fact. And none of those 5 metrics capture this yet. We've been working on timed interactive as a solution for that. Turns out that doesn't work so great in the wild. And so we've got a pair of metrics now, timed interactive and first input delay, that we're just doing some finishing touches on, trying to convince ourselves that they're a really good way of measuring the actual user experience of page load and how the page is responding to the user as it loads. And so our overall plan for these metrics is when we define some key user-facing metrics, then we want to make sure it's possible to measure them everywhere. So this includes in the wild with UMA, getting data back. That's kind of the gold standard, getting data back from real devices, from real users. But also being able to have our perf system to be able to prevent regressions, right? Telemetry, and being able to expose this data to web developers and web perf APIs in the wild, and with tools like DevTools and Lighthouse. So we really want the key user-facing metrics to be something that people can measure from all of our different surface areas. And then first and foremost, we've got to hold the line on these, right? We can't hope to improve the user experience in any of these if we don't have confidence that we're not regressing. And this tends to be not get as much celebration as I think it deserves, because it can be often grungy work. But just preventing our key user experience metrics from regressing while we're fundamentally changing out the engine underneath is a lot of work that people deserve a lot of credit for. And then we're going to pick some areas to drive some improvements in. There's some specific targets for some of these. I think you'll hear more about later in the next day or two. But then it's important to then go and evaluate, as we improve some of these, how does that connect back to things that objectively matter, like business metrics, right? We've got a bunch of studies with different partners about how does it affect engagement, or how does it affect their bottom line in terms of selling more of their product or whatever it is, right? And then continuously reevaluate and revise our metrics to make sure they're connecting to the things that we actually want the web to be. So let's look at some data. First of all, first contentful paint on Android and Windows has held pretty steady over the last 6 months. So, I would love to show it going down, but don't forget, this took a lot of work, right? I've seen the perf sheriff queues, and there are constantly regressions happening that have the potential to hurt our page load experience, and people are putting a lot of work into just keeping it steady, so thank you. And overall, this is telling us that the median page load time is quite good. Median page load is at about a second, which the Rail model tells us is a pretty good user experience, but the long tail is pretty terrifying. On both Android and Windows, over 1% of page loads are taking more than 15 seconds to get their first significant paint to the page, right? That's pretty terrifying, right? Next, OOM rate. There's a nice decline. So this is looking specifically at Android low memory devices where OOM is a real serious problem. There's been a nice decline here over the last 6 months, 46% reduction. But we don't fully understand why that is yet. Some of this might be a measurement problem. And then our responsiveness. The regression you see at P1 there, that's an M62. We just fixed our metric. Turns out there's not much point in measuring the responsiveness of background tabs on Android because the user can't interact with them. So if we focus just on the foreground tabs going forward, we have an improvement in M63 that we don't fully understand. And overall, the median here is not, again, this is Android low-end devices. That's where we know we have a real problem where low-end Android, the web can be really frustrating to interact with in terms of response. And so the median is around 300 milliseconds. Rail target is about 100 milliseconds. So we've got some work here to do for the average experience. But the 99th percentile is pretty terrifying. 1%, like 1% of all seconds, 1 in 100 seconds, the user's having to wait more than 1.5 seconds to just respond to basic action. So this is something we've got to improve. And what's really frightening to me about this graph is there's this slow trend up in that 99th percentile. And I dug into this data a little bit. If you account for, this is not Chrome changes. If you hold the Chrome version content, if you hold the Chrome version constant, you still see this rise. It doesn't even account for the fact that more and more people are buying low-end Android devices. If you hold the device content constant, we still see this rise, which means I think it's reflecting that the web as a whole is getting slower and getting less responsive, or at least the sites that people are going and visiting are getting less responsive. We should worry about that. We should work on driving improvements. But a big thing that's happened since the last BlinkOn that I think is critical to making the right improvements in some of these areas is that Google's released the Chrome User Experience Report. This is taking anonymized, aggregated data from our UKM system and making it available publicly associated with individual URLs. Right? This makes it possible now through tools like PageSpeed Insights for anyone to go and put in a URL, and if it's a public page that people are using often enough, get back real data about how that page is experienced by real users in the wild. So for example, when I put in the URL here for the speed page on Wikipedia, it tells me that in the wild on Android devices, 73% of the time, this page is loading in the top third of all web pages. So the Wikipedia page on speed is indeed fast. That's great. But this gives a way to, like a gold standard for anybody to check the performance of their page and compare it. And hopefully this is going to help enable some more competition in the ecosystem. In particular, I'm excited that Google Search has announced that starting in July, they're using real-world mobile performance data in page ranking. Right? We know page ranking is how pages get ranked in search engines has a big impact on what people invest in for their sites. So to me, this is a key aspect of getting the user experience of the web better. Also, there's some new exciting ideas how we can better use data from the wild. This is a graph showing, it's pretty noisy because this is Linux dev channel, but this is, there's a new tool for profiling heap memory from the wild, collecting stack snapshots from a tiny subset of our users and analyzing that data to try to see where are we actually really leaking memory in practice. And this is just one example of a recent bug that was found using this system that when we fixed it, we found this memory leak in Chrome for Linux, and when we fixed it, the worst case, the 99th percentile and even the 99th percentile memory usage for the browser process dropped dramatically from like 2 gigabytes down to like just a few hundred megabytes. So this shows a real powerful technique for identifying what are the memory problems in our code that are actually impacting users in practice and prioritizing those. And when we fix them, we can see it having a big impact on these in the wild metrics. People are working on bringing this to Android, getting Java stack traces as well. This is still pretty new. We don't yet have this working in the renderer process. There's some separate tooling that's been done. We've made a lot of improvements in catching memory leaks in the renderer process based on like cluster telemetry runs and stuff like that. But I think this technique of collecting data from the wild to get us to prioritize the things that are actually affecting users is pretty powerful. So exciting, hopefully something we can look into more. Here's an example of a feature that's been launched, this milestone, showing the 99th percentile scroll update latency. Our gold standard for launching a feature that affects performance is to run a Finch trial, where we actually experiment on a tiny subset of users in the wild and see how does their user experience compare. So this is the scroll update latency, how janky is scrolling, basically. And you can see that with these two features enabled, latching and async wheels, we got a 30% reduction in the worst case in the 99th percentile and about a 20% reduction in the 95th percentile. So this, for us, is a pretty substantial improvement in the scrolling experience on Windows. So this feature shipped in Chrome 65. Benchmarking can also be a valuable way to drive performance improvements. The V8 and the bindings team have been focusing on the speedometer Speedometer 2 benchmark, and they've achieved significant wins there. And just last week, another CL landed that made the Inferno category of Speedometer 2 another 66% faster. And there's many more projects related to performance. I can't go into all of them. But one I want to call out in particular is that markets where people are buying low-end devices are increasingly important for all of the Chromium project. Right? The Chromium project is used extensively outside markets that just have high-end devices. And so one of the features that Chrome has to address those markets is called previews. And this, on slow networks, it will rely on a variety of techniques to try to optimize the page, to give the user a better user experience, and then give them an option to say, show me the original. So this shows us some pretty substantial improvements, and those key metrics that I said are pretty hard to move. The data compression proxy that we have shows a first contentful paint, the median first contentful paint improvement of 27%. Shifting the median of that metric is pretty tough. And there's a new, in this last 6 months, a new feature Casper is rolled out for that that's increased that system to covering 70% of all HTTP pages now. That's on the server side. We're increasingly doing some of these optimizations on the client side. So for example, offline previews will, if we have a version cached and we're on a really slow network, we can just show the user the cached version with an option to show the online version if they want. That shows a 75% reduction in first contentful paint, and also lo-fi mode, which replaces images with placeholders that users can choose to load, also shows another big reduction. All right, let's keep going. Come on. All right, so that's just a rough summary of performance. I know there was lots of other things that I didn't get to cover. But everyone in this room knows that a lot of our work isn't just about improving Blink. There's a lot that we do that ultimately leads to improving the whole web for all the users of the web. And this group is kind of actually really humbling to be standing here, because I think this group has more influence over the overall health of the web than any other group. It's pretty awesome. So let's talk about some of the accomplishments in that space. First of all, Chrome rolled out its ad filtering system, and the goal here is to provide a better user experience for ads. Not just eliminate ads, but actually make ads better for, more sustainable for publishers and less annoying for users. And I love this model of where the advertising industry got together and published a standard, the better ad standard, for what constitutes a bad ad experience. And Chrome said, okay, if the site's is serving bad ads, we're going to give them 30 days notice, and then we're going to filter all their ads so that Chrome users don't see any of their ads anymore. And the goal of this is to just get sites to improve their user experience. And at the time this launched in February, 65% of the publishers that we'd given notice to had updated their sites to no longer have bad ads. So that's a huge improvement in user experience of the web. It's exciting. Also, in terms of the web platform as a whole, our standards process is really important. So back in December, the WATWIG announced that in collaboration with Microsoft, Mozilla, and Apple and Google, worked together to come up with a new IP policy and governance policy for WATWIG that enabled all the major browser vendors to participate in WATWIG. This is really important. It resolves a bunch of the ambiguity around where is the HTML standard and where is this DOM standard. Of course, we still love the W3C. Lots of important stuff we do is at W3C. That's not going to change. But for the standards that were de facto at WATWIG, it's now a proper process. It's great. Anyone can participate in. Also, as you've heard me say at multiple BlinkOns and over again, when we ask developers what's painful about building for the web, they say interop. Interop is #1 pain point for developers for building for the web. And our strategy for several years now has been we've got to fix the way we engineer the web such that interop is a natural outcome of our engineering processes, not some heroic thing that happens as a result of a whole bunch of bugs that happen after the fact. And we're seeing some great wins from relying on web platform tests for that. A shared test suite that all the browsers use for new features, certainly, and hopefully we can pay back at least the most important debt here. We're continuing to invest heavily in web platform tests. A key metric that the ecosystem infrastructure team set up for tracking our investment here is what fraction of code changes to Blink that include test changes, what fraction of those are changing web platform tests as well? Our goal is to get to the point that really all of our integration testing is happening in the shared test suite. There's no good reason why we should have to be doing any end-to-end testing of how our renderer behaves in a way that's not shared with the other browser vendors. And so I'm happy to announce that we're just about at that point of the majority of the code changes to Blink also changing the web platform test system, which is great. So thank you for everyone who's put work into the infrastructure, but more importantly, everyone who's landing a CL and thinking about how do I make sure this change in behavior isn't just locked into Chrome, but locked into the web. Last BlinkOn, the main outstanding issue we heard from everyone is that web platform tests were, it wasn't easy, it was actually pretty impossible to use web platform tests for things that had to be automated, like automated input. So I'm happy to announce we've made big progress on that. There's now a standard system called testdriver.js. If you just need to have a test that clicks somewhere or sends some keyboard events, you can now do that in a standard way that works on all browsers by using the WebDriver protocol. And we're rapidly expanding that to cover a broader set of scenarios. All right, security is a huge part of the health of the web platform, obviously. Many of you have done a lot of work to help mitigate the recent Spectre and Meltdown attacks. Thank you very much. To me, this is most important from a kind of user psychology perspective, right? If users of the web start to feel afraid to click on links, that's a real problem for our mission. We can't bring computing to the world through a system they're afraid to use. And a number of important features here have shipped. TLS 1.3 is probably the biggest upgrade to network security in years. And after April 30th, Chrome is going to require all new certs to be logged in certificate transparency logs. These are pretty big changes. It's exciting. All right, let's move on to making the web more powerful, more capable. We've talked about service workers for a long time as adding an important new capability to the web, and it's exciting to see that service workers are now really part of the web as a whole. All the major browser vendors now have service workers. They're on by default in Edge 17, which is about to ship, and realistically, what people are most excited about is that Safari just shipped service worker support in both mobile and desktop. We think one of the next big shifts in the power of the web platform is coming from a group of technologies that we're working at W3C on called Houdini. And this is about enabling new extensibility hooks that enable libraries to extend the power of the web platform in a way that is constrained and likely to be performant. So it doesn't rely on, to paint fancy things, you don't need to use tons of DOM elements, or you don't have to jump through crazy hacks in order to just customize some behavior of the browser. So it's exciting to see that since last BlinkOn, Paint Worklet is shipped. And this example here at the right, I encourage you to try it out. This is rough boxes. Like, say somebody wants to have borders on their DOM elements that have this kind of like rough sketch style, right? Like, you should be able to do that in a way that's just integrated with CSS, and that takes advantage of all of the browser's optimizations for deciding when am I going to do painting and all the performance optimizations we have. So Paint Worklet's exciting for that. Typed OM also shipped, and Audio Worklet, enabling audio processing off the main thread, has shipped, and Layout Worklet and Animation Worklet are in active development. And then a lot of the features that we work on really are just working with partners that are key web properties to understand the pain points and the limitations that they've got with the web, and seeking out what are pragmatic solutions that we can get out there to solve a class of problems such as those. So for example, media capabilities is something that's improved the video streaming experience on major streaming sites. Overscroll behavior is one that I like. We went to Facebook a couple years ago to talk about scroll performance of desktop Facebook, and realized that they really needed a way to change the behavior of how scroll propagates through the DOM. So we kind of debated in the standards community about a design for this, and then Facebook went and wrote the spec. And then we implemented the spec, and then the day we shipped it in Chrome, Facebook took advantage of it to make scrolling massively faster on their desktop properties. This is kind of collaboration that I think is super powerful. But all of these things I've talked about, they all add up to this larger vision of, this larger goal of creating a web that's a better experience for all users of the web. Over the past several BlinkOns, we really talk about this in the context of focus on giving developers the appropriate credit and support for building PWAs. And we're not doing this because we think app-like experiences are the right ones for users necessarily, but because apps are a rallying point for getting people to invest in a modern mobile-first experience on the web. Developers want an app-like UI for their heavily engaged users, and we want developers to bring their best experiences to all users of the web. So since last BlinkOn, PWAs have gotten a lot of momentum. In particular, Microsoft has really been pushing PWAs. Edge 17 has full support, including push notifications. And Microsoft has started to ingest PWAs, crawling the web, and putting them into their Windows store, so that to make it really easy for users of Windows to find the best apps, regardless of what technology happens to implement them. This is pretty exciting. Another way we look at the kind of momentum of PWAs, this is a graph showing how often, for PWAs that are installed regularly by users of Chrome Android, what's the diversity? How many different PWAs are there that are getting installed multiple times every day on Chrome for Android? And so we see a nice linear trend upwards here. I'm not allowed to show you the absolute numbers, sorry, but this is exciting. But even more exciting is this graph. This shows the fraction of time spent in Chrome Android spent inside of an installed PWA. That looks like exponential growth to me. That's pretty interesting. You know, the absolute numbers here are still small, but with service workers shipping in Safari, PWAs now have a lot of momentum, which means investing in having a great experience on the mobile web is now something people are taking much more seriously. So I'm excited to see this go up, and we believe this is a proxy for what we really care about, which is that users are being exposed to great experiences on the web. So hopefully we'll find some better ways to measure that. But Alex, why should we even care about this?
I'm glad you asked, Rick. I can't say why you should care, specifically you. But to me, this indicates that our strategy of unlocking developer enthusiasm and investment on the web is working. Of course, there's a lot more to success than high and to the right. Growth in and of itself isn't an ethical value. Growth contains no moral substance. It isn't a calling. We're in a moment of introspection for technology today. Computing's collective role in society is being reevaluated. The brashest amongst us a decade ago said that they were going to change the world. And what if we did, and it wasn't for the better? It's often comforting to think that our actions don't really impact the world that much, that the rules are made up and the points don't matter. But that's not true of the work that we do. The folks in this room are, without any shadow of a doubt, the same people who will define what the web means for the next decade. The decisions you make have weight because they define the space of choices that developers can exercise their agency within, and that billions of users will experience the web through. The choices we make here have impact. Thankfully, it's not in the trolley problem sense. That would be worse. But they do matter. Or maybe not. Maybe they don't matter. Because we share the web as a platform with other browser vendors and other engine makers, it's easy to think that our responsibility is shared. Maybe we don't actually have to be the ones to watch the lines. For many years, it has seemed that Blink was out in front, that our decisions were the ones that were causing other people to make choices. But maybe that wasn't true. We didn't have any data to back it up. But now we do. Thanks to the Web Confluence project, what you're seeing here is a screenshot of the failure to ship metric. You can get to this at web-confluence.appspot.com. And what we see here is that Chrome has the fewest number of features that are not in all three other major engines. That is to say, we are the most complete implementation of the web. So we've made the table stakes. Developers think of us, or can think of us, as the most credibly capable version of the web platform that they could target. And that matters because, as a community, our engine is the basis for how billions of users experience the web, of course. But Confluence also shows that where we lead, others eventually follow. When other browsers see us add something carefully, thoughtfully, leading intentionally, testing, landing tests, writing good specs, it's easier to follow in the same direction. We're always building collaboratively. We're always asking for everyone else to work with us to design these features too. But we have the ability and capacity to take risk, and it does work. When we are able to take that momentum and turn it into new good things for developers, it does cause the entire ecosystem to adopt and adapt. So this is eye-opening. We're leading, but where are we leading? And why are we leading? Why do we do any of this? I was reflecting the other day that I started working on my very first website almost 20 years ago. Yes, it was a high school newspaper website. It's still up, actually. Don't tell anyone. At the time, the web was an exciting alternative to downloading native software, which was hard to get. You had to go, in my case, you had to get in a station wagon and drive to Best Buy, or get it sent to you on a CD. But that friction went away with the web. I was able to finally get to my email without installing Outlook. I was able to use Maps without installing 4 CDs worth of Streets and Trips. It was incredible. It was transformative. And the web wasn't better because it somehow had higher fidelity with the Win32 or MFC controls that I was used to. It was better because it was ubiquitous, because it was lower friction, because the same experience had a model advantage. The lower friction of the web enabled me as a user to go to any computer, not just the one that I had carefully set up, to experience the same services everywhere. The web has this built-in model advantage, but it hasn't always matched it with necessarily security or privacy or other sorts of advantages that you might expect. That has only happened, and we've only been able to make the web a success on desktop because we collectively kept the line. We invested in the features that allowed us to ensure that those experiences were safe, that, like Rick said, clicking on a link is a reasonable thing to do. So this matters because today we're in the fight of our lives. Other engine teams don't, maybe except for with the exception of the WebKit team, don't really have a footprint on the mobile web. The folks in this room, you define what the mobile web is for developers for almost everyone. So this is what we're seeing. This is data from 2016. This is to suggest that people aren't using the web that heavily. They use it a lot. They go to lots of different websites every month, but they don't use it that heavily. OK, 2016, that was a long time ago. What about 2017? Well, the same story keeps showing up. This situation seems pretty stable today. And I expect the data will look pretty similar for 2018. It turns out we're not winning where computing is going. So when the world continues to look like this, developers have every incentive to play the lottery, put their chips into the native app heap, and try to be one of those centralizing head apps. That's where investment in experiences will go if we are not able to support developers in their journey to making experiences on the web. That isn't to say that life is all champagne and roses in the App Store. We can compete, assuming we meet developers halfway. We have to build the features that they expect to have available in order to be able to get those experiences onto the web so that we can mediate those experiences for users. The web community are the ones who decided to turn off a bunch of terrible, regretted features in the web over time that have positively impacted the lives of users. But to do that, those experiences have to be on the web in the first place. So we can compete, but how do we compete? Now that we know that competing is important, most browsers, that is to say the folks who embed our engine, think of the platform as just a thing that happens to go along with their product. Whereas the ecosystem is the thing that they are competing within. It is the sea that they're swimming in. Right? As to say, you need a web to browse, and so the web is our ecosystem. So the ecosystem happens to include a product. The ecosystem is where the products are built and what they are designed to consume. And products happen to include platforms. We're the platform. So we influence developer choice at some future point in time, not necessarily in the short run, but over the long haul. From there, the set of services that get built influence end user choices. So our chosen investments in the web platform allow end users eventually to do more or to do less, to choose one way of delivering their services from developers to those end users. And from there, users make choices. If they choose the web more often, then the web gets bigger, and there's more for browsers to do. If the web gets smaller, well, then we have a smaller ecosystem. There's less reason to want a browser. There's less reason for our product side counterparts to need to continue to show up, and less reason for us to as well. So I know that's a bit of a downer, but the good news is that we can succeed here. This is the Pinterest PWA data from Adi Osmani. He did a case study with them. And I could bore you to death with PWA statistics, but I just want to highlight this one because it's an example of a big brand from a local geography over the last year that has invested heavily in their web experience. They did a huge amount of work to go reduce, for instance, the amount of script that might jank that main thread for a long time. And Pinterest not only saw that their investment created a huge lift in user engagement versus their previous mobile web experience, but they also saw that when they really went to the nines and invested in their mobile web experience, it was able to compete and beat their native app experience on their core metrics. These aren't metrics that we are measuring like first contentful paint. These are their business metrics. The web can be great for developers. If there's any hope of helping users and developers get to that better future together, one that does the same great things for mobile that the web did for desktop, we need to do the work to enable more of these success stories. And Ojan's here to tell us a lot more about how that's going to happen.
Hello. Thank you, Alex. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the things we can look forward to. Obviously, in the next 10 minutes, I'm not going to cover all the things we're going to do over the next 6 months. Just highlight a few things. Of course, we will continue working on making Blink faster. In addition to all the things Rick mentioned, we have a big focus on loading performance for the year. We have a bunch of efforts in this area. A big one of them is service worker startup. We're working on making it so that the service worker starts up faster, but also that when it executes scripts, it does so faster. We have an experiment for a back-forward cache that, similar to what some other browsers have, will give a more instant history navigation feel. We're starting to design loading priority hints that will allow web authors to control the loading order of sub-resources. And a project I'm personally very excited about, we're looking at lazy loading off-screen images and iframes. In the lab, this experiment reduces median page size by 35% and increases page load performance by 18%. And that's during the initial load of the page. But actually, for the whole life of the page, we have metrics from the wild showing that something like 20% of cross-origin iframes are never visible to the user. So actually, a lot of those wins aren't just for page load, but for the whole duration of the page. In addition to loading, a big area of focus for performance is input latency. With site isolation and cooperative scheduling, we're looking at isolating the top-level page from third parties they embed. With touch action hit testing on the compositor and raster-inducing scroll, we're hoping to avoid the main thread in a number of scroll scenarios, which should improve scroll update latency considerably. And with incremental shadow DOM and improvements to V8 and Oilpan GC, we're just going to remove a bunch of sources of jank that web authors don't really have control over today. So that's it, some of the straight-up performance work. We're going to continue also doing the hopefully gentle nudging of the web ecosystem in the direction that we think is good for users. On the security front, in June, Chrome is going to be marking all HTTP pages as not secure. In addition to that, we're starting to explore limiting cookie lifetime on insecure pages as a way of locking down powerful features. And of course, we've mentioned site isolation. We started working on that project many years ago now, and it's finally starting to ship. And actually, with Spectre, it is clear now that the original idea was quite solid, that you really do need to isolate origins from each other. Beyond security, we have a bunch of interventions just to protect users against misbehaving, but not necessarily malicious sites. We're continuing our background tab throttling work to limit workers in background tabs and other types of task queues. In addition, Rick mentioned previews. We have other previews that we're trying. So for example, there's one that loads pages without script. The transform of the pages don't execute the script. And it turns out about 20% of the web works decently well in this mode. You obviously can't do it for the whole web. And you obviously can't do this as the default experience. But if you're on such a slow connection that the page probably wouldn't have loaded, this is a much better experience. In particular, this prototype uses 90% less data, and pages reach first contentful paint 40% faster, which is pretty staggering if you're sitting there waiting for like a 2-minute page load. Beyond performance, we're working on a near out-of-memory intervention for low memory devices. The idea is if you're about to run out of memory, we pause JavaScript with the hope that that will prevent you from just barely falling over that edge. You can finish reading whatever article you were doing or whatever you were trying to do, mostly. And lastly, I got up at BlinkOn, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I'm not even sure, and talked about interventions for restricting ads that redirect users to pages without user choice, user consent, or get you stuck in history loops where you can't hit the back button anymore. We're finally shipping those. I'm very excited. So, in addition to making Blink faster and nudging the web ecosystem, we're continuing to make the web more capable. With WebAssembly, you effectively get the capability of twice as much CPU. And we're working on adding weak references to JavaScript to expand the set of things you can reasonably do with WebAssembly. We're also working on adding picture-in-picture support for better multitasking. And last, but certainly not least, we're working on desktop PWAs. This is pretty exciting. Desktop PWAs rounds out the PWA offering so that you get the full reach of the web when building your PWA. Whereas before they were sort of more a mobile-focused thing. This is live Spotify in Chrome OS. with the install prompt and you install it, you get what is basically a native Chrome OS experience with one pretty big exception. There's the ... menu in the top right corner. And in that menu is copy URL. As we've said many times, clicking on links is what makes the web the web. Sharing URLs is what makes the web the web. So these are web apps, not apps. You still have URLs. So the last thing I want to talk about is high-quality user experience. As we've talked about, PWAs are sort of our offering in the space of building high-quality user experience. And that isn't changing, but we have some ideas of how we can build on top of that and make a much richer and have higher guarantees of good user experience on the web. Some of this is inspired by AMP. AMP has shown that it's possible to make pages that load faster, that users stay on longer, which is frankly some indication of just better user experience. And we think there's parts of that we can pull into the web. And in particular, actually, about a month ago, AMP announced a collaboration between Chrome, Search, and the AMP team to start opening up some of the AMP treatment to non-AMP content. Hopefully, I mean, we'll see how this goes as we try to deploy it and measure it in the wild. But the goal is to get the AMP user experience without necessarily the hacks that are needed right now or necessarily needing to even use AMP in the first place. We want to do this with 4 areas of focus. The first one is around metrics. So as Rick mentioned, we're working on a set of metrics of what is a good performance on the web. We want to extend that beyond performance, so including input delay, but also things like layout stability to measure things jumping around on the page. So we can measure the real performance and user experience of pages in the wild and use that to verify this page has good quality user experience. And metrics is great, but actually that's not quite enough because it's still pretty hard to actually achieve those metrics on the web. You need more than expert level knowledge. Really, you need savant level knowledge to be able to know what things are going to trip you up as you're trying to build a performant, good user experience. So our proposed solution to that is policies. We want to give people opt-in policies, adding to feature policy and content security policy to make it easy to build fast websites, to reduce the amount of expertise you need. The aspirational goal here is someday in the future, you go to MDN, you copy-paste a set of policies, you apply it to your page, and if you get functional correctness, then your page has a very high likelihood of being a fast, good user experience. It takes the I need extreme expertise on the platform out of the equation, and it just means I have to make a page that works. An example of a common mistake that we're trying to address is around images. There's a lot of things you see on real production websites built this year around images that aren't properly optimized. They're not compressed correctly, or they're a very large image on a mobile screen size, that sort of thing. We think we can address all of these things with policies. And to make all of this pragmatically deployable, we want to add a reporting API so that you can actually see what's happening in the wild on your website that users actually see. And policies is also great, but that's not quite enough either. One of the difficulties on the web is there's this mix of low-level and high-level APIs. The low-level APIs aren't quite complete, and the high-level APIs are frankly kind of dated UI paradigms from the 90s. We think we can do better. We want to start adding higher-level APIs to the web. As part of the extensible web, we need to keep adding the primitives, but we also need the higher-level APIs so you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time or rely on somebody else where you can't really evaluate whether they did a good job. So we want to build these things. We're calling them layered web APIs. They're basically just web APIs with 2 extra restrictions. One is that you have to import them. They're not just available on the global scope. And the other is that they need to be spec'd in terms of primitives exposed to web authors. In this way, if a browser vendor wants to, they could implement it in JavaScript. We're not going to require that as part of the spec. But we think that gives good layering to the platform and gives a scalable way of adding more high-level features. But high-level features are only as powerful as the primitives they're built upon. So we need to continue extracting primitives from the platform so that we can do the things we need to do. So some of the efforts in this space will be around web components. We're working on CSS parts and form participation. Around modules, we're working on modules and workers and package maps. And just generally, actually, worker APIs. It needs to be easier to use workers. So this is animation worklet, off-screen canvas, APIs for driving video from workers. So with all of those things combined, I think we can get a pretty good user experience on the web. But there's one thing that we could do that's just unique to the web. We've mentioned clicking on links, URLs, that sort of thing. I think we can make navigation on the web considerably better. It's already a very low friction way of getting from website to website. You don't have to install apps. But links and iframes, which are the ways you get to other content on the web today, are pretty dated. They're 20 years old, more than 20 years old. We think there's a lot of untapped potential here. With web packaging, we think we can get privacy-preserving preloading of pages. That's a fun way to, the tongue twister. And basically, we think we can preload content such that when you click on a link, the navigation is then instant. It doesn't even need to touch the network. And beyond that, we have ideas that are very early, so I'm not even going to give it a name, of extending beyond links or iframes. We think there's something in between. You can have an iframe that you could then navigate to. It has all the privacy-preserving user experience aspects of a link, but it has the rich embedding of an iframe. And so with all of that, we think the desktop web succeeded because links were safe to click, both security-wise, and you had a reasonable expectation of performance. The mobile web still needs that. We think we can bring that and a lot more with this combination of metrics, policies, layered APIs, and new navigation APIs. So that's just how we've been thinking about it and what we're picturing for the next few months on Blink and the web platform. But actually, we're really proud of how Blink and Chromium are open source collaborative projects. So we hope you'll spend the next 2 days giving input, helping shape that direction, and talking about what work you will do, we will do, to shape the future of client-side computing. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming again, especially those who came a long way. And before we close, I want to thank the conference organizers one more time. And especially, I'd like to thank Drew. Drew has planned the last 6 BlinkOns? 5 BlinkOns. And unfortunately, he's decided to move to Japan. So this is his last BlinkOn. So I want to just appreciate the amazing work he's done on many BlinkOns. Next, we have a 10-minute break and then breakout sessions. Thank you.